So today I'm here with Dr. Wendell Hutchens. Wendell's an assistant professor at the University of Arkansas. He received his bachelor's and master's degree at NC State and his PhD at Virginia Tech. So today on Root Docs, which is a mini-series dedicated exclusively to the topic of soil-borne diseases, we're going to talk about a particular disease that Wendell may be familiar with, and that is spring dead spot of warm season turf. So thanks for joining Wendell.
Thanks for having me, Jesse, or Dr. Benelli, I should say.
Jesse's just fine.
Yeah, how formal we being here, but yeah, happy to be a part of this, and thanks for having me. And yeah, when you mentioned familiar with spring dead spot, I think I'm almost too familiar at this point. It was at spring green up back in April. I was looking out at some plots, and I was like so excited to just see some dead turf again. It was great. It's like an old friend. I missed it.
Yeah, it's so funny. Pat Jones says all the time on Twitter, turf pathologists are weird, and we tend to like seeing that. So
that's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, the first question I have is just out of my own curiosity. We're going to talk about spring dead spot and the pathogen and life cycle of that organism. But just out of my own curiosity, because I know kind of what I went through after finishing my PhD at the University of Tennessee. What was that process like? Like, how fast was that process from finishing your PhD, walking on stage, and you're already a professor at Arkansas, which is halfway across the country? How fast was that?
It was a whirlwind. And then another thing that was added on top of that is I got married. So just all of it at once. But yeah, it was crazy. It was, finished up my dissertation and defended, and it would have been mid-March of 22. And then during that time period was interviewing and got offered the job and walked across the stage in May, and then started looking for places in Fayetteville. And so last year was just the fastest year of my life, and got married and started the new job. And it's been an awesome experience so far, but it's just, I finally feel like I'm starting to settle down for a little bit. It's been the craziest year of my life, but also the best year of my life.
Yeah, it's a similar thing for me. I remember there was just one committee meeting. I don't know if it was the same thing with you, where you're with your committee members. It's not just your meeting advisor. And in my case, Brandon said, Dr. Horvath, he's like, if you do this, this, and this, you're going to graduate here. And it was December of 16, and it was the first time I remember seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. And I just hit the gas pedal. It was fast and furious. And like you, a lot of things kind of changed. I remember my first child was born December 1st. I walked on stage December 5th, and then moved to Chicago third week of December, right before Christmas. And I remember sitting in that office. You may have had the first experience. You're in your office, and you're kind of the guy now, the principal investigator for the first time. And I remember thinking, like 8 weeks ago, I was sitting in a shared grad office with other grad students who are also my friends, having a good time. I didn't have my PhD yet. I wasn't a father at that time. To 8 weeks later, it is so completely new and fast, but also very fun and exciting.
Yep, life is fun that way. It can spin you around and turn you upside down, and it's a lot of fun. Just enjoy the ride, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a crazy experience though. Yeah, it was kind of funny because you're right. That's been honestly the biggest adjustment going from a graduate student to a faculty member is I still feel like I relate more to the graduate students. It's kind of like, I feel like I guess I'm on the other side of it now. So it's kind of hard to get used to delegating and kind of being in the leadership role. And like you said, one moment you're getting picked on at your defense, trying to answer questions, and you nervous and all that stuff. And the next minute you're the one that's on the committee. So it's kind of neat, but a whirlwind, but it's a lot of fun. I wouldn't change it.
Yeah, and after graduation, I moved to Chicago, and then I was in Canada for several years. And I got an opportunity to come back to the Southeast, and that opportunity came in October, which is a fantastic time to leave Canada. Miss out on one of those winters.
That's right.
But I remember coming back down to the Southeast, and I looked at how much work you all have been doing. And when I say you all, that is, all those turf pathology programs from Dr. McCall at Virginia Tech, Jim Kearns, and Joe Roberts in the Carolinas, and then also Brandon at Tennessee.
Hmm.
You guys did a ton of work, and it was such an excellent resource for me to be able to, read all of these projects, that you guys have been doing. And in your case, it was spring dead spot. And I want to read something. Is essentially the first sentence in your scientific abstract of your dissertation,
Uh-huh.
and it essentially says spring dead spot is one of the most challenging diseases, which is kind of jargon for this stuff is bleeping tough to work on.
Yeah, that's right.
So tell me a little bit about spring dead spot and what makes it so challenging.
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny you mentioned that. So I remember a little backstory on why I chose to work with spring dead spot and a few reasons I've been interested in root diseases or soil-borne diseases. Is I remember when I first started my master's degree with Jim Kearns, he had options for two projects I could work on. He said, do you want the low-hanging fruit, easy project, or do you want to become famous one day and work on something hard? I said, well, I want to work on something difficult. I want a challenge. He said, well, you're going to be working with soil-borne diseases. And I was like, okay. And so I took that in mind, and I've kind of, built that as my main area of expertise or focus, is because, they're hard to work with. They don't always cooperate. You've got to, do a shotgun approach. And when you're putting out trials, you may get disease one year and you may not the next year. It's just kind of the way it is. But yeah, what's so challenging about it is, you see it, and the infection is mainly taking place in the fall by the pathogen, right? And so that's when the plant is weakening, and then throughout the winter is where you're going to get a lot of your damage. So you're really reliant on having a coldish winter, and you're relying on, what's our spring going to be like? What's our transition going to be like? What was the pathogen activity? And you really don't know what your results are going to be until the next spring. So you can't track it. So it's just, it's a literal spray and pray when you're putting out fungicide trials, hoping for the best, because I can't tell you how disappointed it is when you wait, 5 months. It's been a long, cold winter, and you come out and you're getting ready to take your first rating for your spring dead spot trials, and you see no disease. It's like, well, we missed the boat there. But then, you move down the road 50 miles and you find a different site that just got obliterated. So it's a bear to work with. And any of these root infecting fungi have just been like, any of the Gammatomyces species with take all. I mean, I really commend the people who decide to dive, head first into those, but it's a
Yeah,
challenge.
that would be just mentally frustrating. Probably one of the reasons you chose multiple locations. One reason is you're not guaranteed anything working on these root diseases. If you miss out on a field season, which is hard as a faculty member, but if you miss out as a field season as a graduate student, that's potentially one more year. Say in multiple locations, what would be another driving force for something like spring dead spot having multiple locations? Do you think it's to help capture some of the different species that cause this disease, and how many total organisms are actually causing spring dead spot?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's actually a lot of the reason. You're exactly right why we did that approach. I went around the whole state of Virginia when I was doing work there, even up into Maryland, at some facilities there. And, one of the big issues about Virginia is it's kind of right in the northern part of that transition zone. So we're seeing Ophiosphaerella korrae, Ophiosphaerella herpotricha. Those are the two predominant species we have here in North America. And there's also a third species, Ophiosphaerella normare. We don't see that one quite as much, but that it can still occur in North America. But it was interesting, though, when we were going around at different locations, we were taking samples. The first step of my PhD was to take a survey of all these golf courses, athletic fields, sod farms in the mid-Atlantic region. And the thing that really stood out to us is we have both species, and it's kind of, it seemed at first it was kind of random on where you would find them. You would go to one facility and you would have a predominantly korrae population, and then you would go a few miles down the road and the next facility had predominantly herpotricha. So we really wanted to make sure when we were doing fungicide trials is we wanted to capture both species, Because they don't respond similarly to fungicides. I always tell people, if you have spring dead spot, you don't need to manage for spring dead spot. You need to manage for the species that's causing spring dead spot, right? You need to manage for the pathogen itself. But one of the interesting things we found out from that survey is a good predictor, because I get asked this question a lot from turf managers, is how do I know which species I have? I was like, well, number one, you can send us a sample and we can do PCR and find out for you pretty quickly. But number two is you can get a pretty good guess depending on which cultivar you have planted. So for Bermuda grass, for example, if the parent material of the cultivar came from like the southeast, so if it's like a Georgia, like a Tifway or something like that, there's a really good chance it's going to be Ophiosphaerella korrae. And if the parent material came from the Midwest, like a Oklahoma State variety, there's a really good chance that it's going to be herpotricha. And so it's not a perfect, 100% accuracy, but that's a good way to kind of guess on which species is the predominant one. But yeah, that was our approach. I spent more time in that state vehicle. I put like 30,000 miles on it the first year or so. I was just running around the state chasing spring dead spot. But yeah, that was a big impetus for why we did that.
Yeah. Is there any difference in the size of these like, is it even possible to look at the
Yeah, we're looking yes, I want to say yes, it's not perfect. This is completely anecdotal, but the herpotricha patches, and a lot of it does depend on at which stage of the epidemic it's in. Is it year 1 or is it year 5, right? But I have noticed that korrae locations, the patches seem to be kind of, yeah, that's right. And all patches come with a Miller Lite can in it.
It's an aluminum can to provide scale to the pictures. So could you tell by the size of these patches that that's the korrae one, or is that just not possible for the end user or golf course superintendent?
So currently we don't. I can't speak with any 100% accuracy. My guess is, the larger patches seem to be herpotricha typically, and the more dense, completely necrotic patches, kind of down to the ground, we seem to be korrae. And we've seen that korrae kind of is more aggressive in a lot of ways than herpotricha, but it's also a lot harder to manage with fungicides than herpotricha is.
Yeah.
But we're working on that right now. There's a Dr. McCall's student, Caleb Henderson. Keep an eye out for him. He's going to be doing some awesome things in the future. But he's developing like machine learning models right now that can detect spring dead spots and say, okay, if the patch is this shape and this size and it's got this color or tint to it, you can predict that maybe it's caused by herpotricha or maybe it's X, Y, or Z. So he's doing some really cool stuff on that, and been doing a lot of work with that using drone imagery. So I'm hoping in the next few years we'll maybe be able to actually have pretty good prediction models for which species it is. But right now, the easiest thing to do is, like I said, if you want to get a pretty close estimate, look at the varieties that you're growing. And if you really want to know, just send a sample to me or your local turf pathologist, and we'll find out for you.
Yeah, nice. And so we tend to think of spring dead spot of being, a disease of Bermuda grasses. Can it attack some of the zoysias? Have you ever seen it, especially the zoysias that could be mown a little lower, or have you seen an uptick of them? And I bring it up because, we've bred some really amazing cultivars of Bermuda grass, and they make excellent putting greens. And I feel like the same thing is kind of happening with some of these zoysias. Mm-hmm. Do you think this could be problematic on those zoysias that are being, geared towards, putting green height turf?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a concern. Now, it's not typically as big of an issue on zoysia grass, but what we have seen though is when it does occur on zoysia, it's really challenging because zoysia typically takes longer to recover from the patches. So that's kind of so if you have it on zoysia grass, that's an issue because it's going to be slow to recover. But yeah, that's going to be a concern for sure. I think we're going to have to start managing zoysia much like we do Bermuda in certain cases with these new, diamond, laser, prism, some of these putting green zoysia grasses that are actually, I've been impressed with. I played the Walker course in Clemson, South Carolina a month or so ago, and they have diamond zoysia putting greens, and those things were unbelievable. I was very impressed. So if we can get those zoysia grass putting surfaces to that level of quality, I think you might see it becoming a little bit more popular. And as the grass gets more popular, inevitably you're going to have more problems that pop up,
Yep.
and I think spring dead spot is certainly going to be one of those.
So what you're saying is worm season turf grasses can get disease. That,
You better believe it. Yeah, there's no silver bullet, that's for sure. And they can get plenty of diseases, and that's what I've seen with these ultra dwarfs is, there's so many good attributes to them. But we thought when they originally started coming out that these things are going to be really disease tolerant or disease resistant, and just like anything in life, there's trade-offs, right? So you may not get some of the traditional creeping bentgrass diseases, but you're going to get other diseases. And the issue with these ultra dwarfs, as far as disease management, is we don't fully understand a lot of these diseases yet. We're still kind of teasing out the details on some of that. And take all root rot's a prime example. I mean, Cam Stevens did some awesome work for Jim Kearns on that disease, and I just blew my mind how difficult it is to manage, because it's really a species complex. And Aaron Tucker at Mississippi State
yep.
did that work as well. So it's we're still figuring it out. I got asked a question yesterday in a presentation. They were like, what do I do for take all? I've been on a steady fungicide program. I'm doing my combination products. I'm hitting them at the monthly interval, and that's a tough question to answer because the pathogen's pretty active, and it can be active all year round. So
yeah, and for a lot of those, spring dead spot is the classic example, and I think some of those principles should be extended to things like take all root rot
Yep.
and mini ring. Because on Bermuda grass, a lot of these applications that people should be making on Bermuda grass, if you want to be preventative, are when that Bermuda grass is in just peak health, where it is looking visually outstanding. It's in the month of July, your soil temperatures are up, there's still a lot of sun. Bermuda grasses are humming along. You could mow them 3 times a day if you wanted to. They almost give the impression that they're bulletproof that time of year. But that's when you kind of want to, some of these other ones like take all, mini ring, start making those applications, even though you may not see the symptoms until later. Spring dead spot's that classic example. You make these applications in the fall to protect your turf over the winter. And my next question to you is kind of a theoretical one, because I don't know if anybody has the answer. What's killing the turf in this situation? You get spring dead spot, runner hyphae. What's resulting in those bare patches in the spring?
Yeah, I mean that's the $1,000,000 question. We're still trying to understand, truly the biology and the etiology of these diseases. Spring dead spot's a challenge. So with that in mind, what's actually killing the turf is, I think it's twofold. In many cases, it's the infection by the pathogen in the fall. When soil temps are around 20 C, you're looking at it's active in a pretty wide range of temperatures. Actually, it grows optimally in the lab setting around 24 C. So it really likes that warmer temperature. But so does Bermuda grass, right? But what I look at it is it's a competition thing. So Ophiosphaerella, the pathogen, is able to continue infection and growing and proliferating while Bermuda grass is shutting down. So then it becomes more competitive than the Bermuda grass. So it's able to weaken that plant in the fall. That's why we don't see a lot of spring development or increased infection in the spring, is because Bermuda grass is able to outcompete the pathogen at that point. So it's kind of a game or a race. So the fall is the most susceptible period for Bermuda grass to the pathogen. So Ophiosphaerella is infecting in the fall. It's weakening Bermuda grass. It's weakening those roots and those underground structures, but it doesn't completely kill it. What sends it over the edge typically is when you get those cold temperatures during the wintertime or frost injury. So it's kind of localized winter kill, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a twofold thing, and that's kind of what's interesting is, you don't really see symptoms if you don't go fully dormant a lot of the times, because you're not actually getting cold enough to kind of, have a cold or freeze injury.
It's almost like flipped. It's almost like flipped from talking about Bermuda grass grains to bent grains.
Yep.
Is in the bent grains you got the you can get summer patch on them now. Pythium root rot, and then with them it is those pathogens are weakening the plant, and then it's exposed to just stinking hot temperatures.
right.
air and soil temperatures, traffic, and then the plants die off. It's almost just like as you say, the pathogen weakens the turf and then kind of hands that baton off to the environmental stressors, and then boom, it is over with and done.
You're exactly right. And that's, we talk a lot about, and I kind of think of it in plant pathology. One of the first terms I learned when I was, taking plant pathology back at NC State, 8 or 9 years ago, is this term called predisposition. Okay. And they talk about how, the environment, a stressful environment can predispose the plant, so make it more susceptible to the pathogen. But also, I think with some of these root pathogens, like we're talking about, it's almost flipped. Is the pathogen can predispose the plant to stressful environmental conditions, right? And like you just talked about, you get the infection sometimes on these bent grass putting greens before you ever even see symptoms. Summer patch is a prime example. I mean, that infection is taking place kind of in the spring, late spring, but you're not seeing symptoms till it gets hot and dry in the summertime. And the work's already done, essentially. The damage is already done. So it's kind of almost flipped from what we originally learned is, the environment is stressing the plant out, making it more susceptible to the pathogen. I think with some of these ERI fungi and some of these root infecting fungi, it's actually that they are stressing the plant out and predisposing it to the environment. So it's kind of it's a neat thought, and I think that just goes to show the importance of staying on heavy preventative fungicide programs, doing everything you can during stressful environmental periods to kind of back off and take the stress off the plant, raise mowing heights, turf fans are great, properly irrigate, all that good stuff. But it's a really tough problem. And it's unfortunate being a pathologist sometimes because I get calls, with an extension appointment where it's just like, what can I do? I've got Pythium root rot, or I've got summer patch or whatever. And at that point, you're on your heels when you're trying to go curatively. I mean, there are curative options, but it's a lot more difficult from a curative standpoint than it is preventative. So I think it's just so important. It just really emphasizes the importance of season-long early preventative programs, and then working with those throughout the season.
And at for those listening or watching this, so today's date it's May 19th, 2023. There could be people out there. It has been a very moderate spring. We've actually had a spring, at least in the southeast, where we've had some cooler nights. The temperatures have yet to hit 90 plus in a lot of areas. So they've been staring at these spring dead spot patches that are just completely bleached out for several weeks now. So if you're talking to a superintendent and they're not happy with their spring dead spot program or not happy with the results, and you start that conversation, what would be some of the questions that you ask that superintendent? Especially as in, like, well, what was your program and when did you start making these fungicide applications? Because soil temperatures seem to be very important to timing those applications.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's every presentation I give on disease management. I start out with the first slide, and every single one, there's 4 things you can do to manage a spring dead spot or any disease with fungicides. The first thing is you properly identify the disease, and I think that's actually more difficult than it seems like. It keeps me on my heels sometimes. But you have to properly ID the disease. You have to select the proper fungicide. So those are the first couple questions I always ask a superintendent. I don't mean to insult intelligence or anything, but it's easy to miss some of these things sometimes. And then the next question I ask is, what was your application timing? And I'm glad you mentioned that about the soil temperatures, because we've got to get to that where we're using soil temps by season modeling to apply our fungicides. And I think that's really important, not just doing it off a calendar basis, the traditional September 15th first app, October 15th second app, because not all Octobers are created equal. Okay. I mean, when I started doing this research in Blacksburg, Virginia, back in 2019, October 3rd was 97 degrees in Blacksburg, and that was the hottest day of the year. And for most folks in that part of Virginia, if they're growing Bermuda grass, would have already sprayed both of their fungicide apps for spring dead spot. So they would have totally missed the window. The fungicide would have degraded. The pathogen would have still had plenty of activity. So we started thinking, well, we need to get away from just doing a calendar-based model. I mean, some things it's okay to do that, but we need to look more at environmental parameters and look at these soil temperatures. So what we found is anywhere between about 55 Fahrenheit and 65 Fahrenheit, maybe up to 70. That's your 15-degree window in the fall where you need to make your fungicide applications for spring dead spot. So that is absolutely paramount to time that out. And we actually saw with some products, you can wait even if you get down kind of later in the winter time or kind of late fall, early winter, you can actually get some activity if those soil temps stay around 50 from fungicide application. So it's just, that's a challenge, but you got to look at those soil temps, monitor those. I think that's such an important thing. And then another thing I've been on a kick about for so long now, and I know we've talked about this with some of your PhD research and some of my master's work, is the target site. Where do you want that product to be? Okay. Getting that product to where it needs to be is super important, because for a root disease, fungicides don't help us out in many cases. They're not moving, up and down the plant truly systemically. There's only, the phosphites do, but other than that, you're going to have to water those products in for a root disease. And I think that's so important to kind of keep that in mind is don't just spray it over the top, spray it at the right time and water them in. And that's how you really can, give yourself the best chance for managing spring dead spot.
And to that note, on the seminar circuit, talking about some of this and then answering, a lot of questions, sometimes I think people will look at, some of the old school, herbicide labels, and they will say, put your pre-emergent down, and then the next 7 days, make sure you water it in. Mm-hmm. Fungicides tend to be a little more sticky than some herbicides that like to bind as fast as they can. When should somebody, how soon after application would you recommend to apply post-application irrigation on that treated surface?
As soon as you get off whatever surface you're treating, ASAP, because if you wait till that product dries on the plant, it's really, really difficult to dislodge it and actually move it down. Travis Gannon and Jim Kearns and Cam Stevens and Daniel Freund at NC State, they showed some awesome research on post-application irrigation timing. And like I said, if you wait 30 minutes or more, it's really hard to get that product to actually move. So I tell folks, as soon as you get off the green or as soon as you get off the fairway, cut the heads on. I mean, it's super important. Now, if you're not able to do that, which is not always possible, depending on, how much play you have or whatever the conditions are, the best thing to do is wait to water in until the next morning when there's dew on the ground, because some of that product is going to resolubilize and be in solution on the plant surface, not all of it, but some of it, and then you can knock it off and dislodge it with an irrigation event. So it's either immediately after application or the following morning, but the best thing to do is immediate. Don't give it more than 30 minutes to start drying on the plant, because it's you're not going to get the mobility that you desire out of that. Yep.
So some good points that could be extended to a lot of other things. I remember being up in Canada and telling people with their snow mold program, get away from the calendar. You got to, go on what conditions that you're currently seeing and some of those forecasted conditions, with the, back to spring dead spot. And so with some of the modeling work that you've looked into in soil temperatures, that first application being applied right around that 70-degree mark, 2 inches down in the soil. And then, so you make an application, water it in, and then in most programs, you're going to need a second application, correct? In about 28 days later?
Yep. Yeah, 21 to 28 days later, depending on soil temp. So if you get a sharp decline in the fall where it starts getting really cold rapidly, you want to tighten that interval probably down to 21 days. But if you have kind of a traditional fall where you taper off just with standard soil temperatures, then you can get away with that 28-day interval. I recommend the 2 applications. I think it's important. And if for some reason soil temps stay warmer longer, you may need a 3rd application, honestly. But you can get away. And that's the great thing about research, is you can get away if you time it perfectly with 1 full label rate application at the exact right temperature. Now that's a challenge, and that's obviously a lot to hedge your bets on. But if you only want to go out once, the soil temperature I like is between 60 and 65 if you're going to do just 1 application. But you have to time it perfectly, and you have to hope and pray that Mother Nature doesn't throw you a curveball.
I I like what you just said because there are a lot of guarantee programs out there, and essentially, on our end, and if you follow our recommendations, we will support you any way possible. Hopefully everything goes well. But you said something just now. Essentially, you make two applications, but if Mother Nature isn't doing what it's supposed to do,
Yeah.
there there may be a situation where you could need three
Yep.
applications, because it's hard to guarantee anything, because any guarantee program, it's like you're guaranteeing what the weather's going to do, and that's, as far as I know, not possible as of yet.
Yeah, yeah. Spring dead spot doesn't care what date it is, right? It is
Yeah.
triggered by environmental conditions. So if it gets, up warm enough late December and the soil temperature up at 55, 60 degrees, that pathogen's active in late December.
Yep.
So you got to watch out for that. I remember it was around Christmas of 2017, I want to say. I know in Raleigh, North Carolina, it was 75 degrees on Christmas Day, and it stayed warm for a period of time. I remember wearing shorts on Christmas Day.
I
So,
remember that one.
yeah.
Yep.
So that was a good example of a year where that third application probably was needed, especially after that it got cold, and then so you then had those more killing cold temperatures. So you might have needed to go out with an emergency application in early January, which is so different to be thinking about. But like I said, it just goes back to our point we were talking about earlier, is looking at the calendar and judging everything off of that is, I think you're going to shoot yourself in the foot, in many cases. You have to pay attention to environmental conditions more than anything and be willing to adjust. I mean, large patch, you know more about large patch than anyone, but that's a great example of a disease as well, where you might need that third application in the springtime, or a couple in the fall as well, just depending on what kind of spring you have. So it's a challenge, but I think more and more turf managers are moving toward it. I've been encouraged by some of the recent talks I've given at how many people are looking at environmental parameters over calendar date. It's
Yep.
actually the conversation has shifted in my 8 or 9 years in the industry, so it's been pretty exciting to me.
Yep. And so, kind of walking through this, they look at soil temperatures, make their applications, and let's just pretend it's in the spring, things are greening up, and all of a sudden, say you have a little bit of breakthrough. Is there any benefit to a spring application of a fungicide to hasten recovery, to speed up recovery? And what else could they be doing to help that process of speeding up recovery when Bermuda grass is still just crawling on its hands and knees,
Yeah.
very slow to wake up?
Well, yeah, I think there is some advantage to recovery with the fungicide application. Um, I'm not going to say it's going to be the biggest slice of the pie as far as the importance of what's going to make it recover. Nitrogen is going to be the most important thing, but a fungicide application could enhance recovery and kind of get you out of it a little bit sooner, and also it could cover some other bases with other diseases as well. So I would look at a fungicide that's going to cover spring dead spot and also a wider swath of other issues as well, so you can kind of couple it up into the same application. But yeah, I definitely don't think it's going to hurt you for a spring app. But one of the things I would say as well that's really flip side of what I expected when we started doing some research on recovery is nitrogen's obviously important, and that was the most important thing we saw. Fungicide application can be helpful for recovery, but the one thing you don't want to do, and there's some people who are probably going to totally disagree with me, but I tested this multiple locations and it really blew my mind, is you don't want to go out and be aggressive with cultivation too soon, because cultivation, if there's a lot of spring dead spot out there, it does not hasten recovery. It actually slows it down quite a bit. So what I tell folks is wait till you're mostly recovered before you go out with your traditional aerification. Because if you go too soon and there's a lot of damage there, you're actually, like I said, slowing down that recovery, which really blew my mind. Because when we started the process, we're like, oh, of course, nitrogen applications, cultivation, that's going to get you out of it much faster. But it turns out the nitrogen's far more important than the cultivation, and the cultivation actually slows it down. So really surprised me, and like I said, it's kind of flip side of what you would originally think. But that's one takeaway I would really tell superintendents and turf managers is, wait, be patient till you're about 90% recovered, and then you can go in with your traditional, cultivation practices.
Yep. And then I think, back when I was, conducting research, is that if I was not able to produce my own fungal inoculum, what I would do if I wanted to spread that disease around for, say, next year, right in the spring when that inoculum's still fresh and you could still identify that runner hyphae, I would probably core spread that around so I could spread out that inoculum for next year. And
You're exactly right. Yeah, that's you're moving it around, and over the last 4 years or 3 or 4 years, I guess we've learned a lot about spreading inoculum with COVID and everything, and how that works, and then taking those same concepts or some of the similar concepts and thinking about turf diseases on an epidemiological perspective is really important, and those cultivation practices, while the pathogen is active, can really shift around some stuff. And I tell supers all the time, like, if you've got a problem area or a problem green, do that one last if you're aerifying, right? Because you don't start there, don't move it around, whether it be nematodes or a soil-borne pathogen or whatever it may be. But yeah, you're exactly right. That's a good way as a researcher to get some pretty even distribution of disease in an area.
yeah, if you ever want to know what to do to get rid of disease, ask a turf pathologist what they do to encourage it. And
Exactly.
in a way, you guys are farmers. You guys could, I know you worked at, NC State with Dr. Jim Kearns, and I happened to see his spring dead spot area. Holy cow, does he get hammered with spring dead spot at his location?
Yeah, it is. I was honestly, he posted something on Twitter a couple weeks ago. I was so envious because it was like, that is just perfect coverage. And you see these nice little squares where certain treatments were working. And, it's funny too. We always say with spring dead spot, and really any research, and you probably have heard this before, is if you want to find out how to get rid of spring dead spot, put a trowel where it's supposed to be, and it won't show up there.
Yeah.
It'll show up beside it. Yeah, that's right.
I've done that trick a couple of times.
Yes.
I used to tell, industry cooperators when I was in Chicago, I can get fairy ring. I have a location. I use like Google Earth imagery. It has showed up at this spot every single year. Put a trial out, nothing.
That's right. That's the truth. That's the way it is, man.
It's like, thanks for the $5,000 check, but sorry, I did everything I could. And
that's exactly right.
A lot of times you'll just run it again for them the next year.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the joys of working in soil-borne diseases. It's a real challenge with that. But it's funny because we got, I was looking at Kearns's Bermuda green there at the Lake Wheeler Research Farm, and it's covered in spring dead spot. And I was so excited because our Arkansas Tiff Eagle green got hammered this year. So I'm like, all right, next year we're putting out fungicide trials. It probably won't show up, but we're going to put them out on that green, and it's going to be. I'm going to we'll start comparing images here. So I feel like, yeah, my spring dead spot's better than yours. So that's the goal.
Oh, multiple locations is awesome. I'm on the industry side now, and man, we ask a lot of you guys, and we'll give these protocols for. It's always nice having multiple locations because, if we don't get cold out east, maybe we'll get cold down in Arkansas, which is huge having multiple locations to, at least get some data.
Absolutely.
And out of my own curiosity, like doing, because you've done spring dead spot research for years now, are there any carryover effects? Meaning that if you put down a high quality material, timed it right, and just really controlled that organism, are there carryover effects the next year? Would you say would it be hard to put a trial over the over the exact same area because you've had such treatment effects the previous year?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen that with certain fungicides for sure, that if they're highly effective, they're knocking those inoculum levels or those pathogen levels back to a certain point where they really can't recuperate. And you see activity of a fungicide. We've seen it up to 2, maybe 3 years with certain products.
Yeah.
And that's not because the fungicide's still residually in the soil, really. That's because the inoculum levels took such a gut punch, essentially, from the fungicide that it's taken them a really long time to recover to the levels where they can actually start causing disease again. So yeah, that's something that, and purposely with some of my PhD research, we would do the same exact plots and the same exact treatments from year to year to see like the stacking effect. Is like, all right, if you treat a plot or an area with the same fungicide 2 years in a row, maybe you're seeing that much more benefit, long term. So yeah, you're exactly right. The carryover effect, I was really impressed by that. My graduate student right now, his name is Mike Battaglia. He's actually working on that. Is when you spray a fungicide, we're testing a pretty wide screening of fungicides. Is how long is that activity really going to last? Is it going to be just a single year thing, or a certain product's going to be 2, maybe 3 years? And so we're pretty excited to see that. But yeah, I love coming back in the springtime. It's some kind of abandoned trials, and you can still see perfect squares in some of the areas that hadn't been sprayed in 2 or 3 years. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And one of the neatest things that I read through in your work at Virginia Tech is that you did a really creative study where you made kind of monthly applications that you would you set up a trial, and then you would, on this plot, you're going to treat in the spring at this soil temperature, and you did that multiple times. So this plot is just going to receive one spring application, then like a middle spring, late spring application, and kind of did it all the way through the fall. What in terms of knocking down inoculum, just on the surface, because we see carryover effect sometimes when you make an outstanding fall application, and the pathogen is growing whenever those temperatures reach that point, which they can reach that point in the spring as well when soil temperatures start climbing. I would have thought that we would see greater knockdown in those spring applications. And it's just kind of it's almost like a chat to have like over a beer sometime. Why do you think you didn't see across multiple locations those spring apps doing much the following year for spring dead spot?
Yeah, that was a little. I was hoping to see more out of that as well. We saw only one treatment where we actually saw some activity, but it wasn't as impressive as I was maybe hoping. What I kind of concluded is maybe, all right. So if you spray a spring application with no fall application, so spring only is kind of how we created the experiment or designed the experiment. So a spring only application. Well, if you think about the spring dead spot pathogen, Ophiosphaerella still grows optimally at soil temps of 77 degrees, which is crazy to think about.
Warm.
So
Warm.
yeah, very warm.
Yep.
So it has all season to recover and build up its inoculum levels. Now you might actually be knocking it way back in the spring, but it's got 6-8 months, maybe 6 months of time to recuperate before it's shut down again during the colder temperatures during the winter. Now the advantage of the fall application is it doesn't have a recovery period. Okay, you're knocking it back, and then once soil temps get below 50 degrees, it's not able to actually recuperate. So you kind of delayed it or suppressed it for Mother Nature's helping you out at that point, but you suppressed it for that period of time. So that's why I think we don't see the spring applications being quite as effective, just because you can apply in the spring and it has plenty of time to kind of get back.
A long runway to kind of build up for its next flight. Yeah,
absolutely. That's exactly right. That's a good way to put it. I might use that, Jesse.
Nice. Well, thanks, Wendell, for joining. What is the first episode of Root Docs? Again, a little mini series that is exclusively designed to where we just talk about soil-borne root diseases. You can find this series on the NVU website or on YouTube. So, Wendell, thank you so much for joining, and good luck this field season. I know you're going to be busy because it is second, third week of May, and yeah, that summer season's busy for you guys.
We're in it full force right now, but thanks so much for having me, Jesse. Really enjoyed it, and I hope to visit some in the future and let me know if you need anything. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm sure Zach Riker will keep you busy with some of his trials.
Oh yeah, Zach's the man.